Welcome to another edition of Whiskey, Games, and Nerd Stuff. Today's whiskey is Swear Jar Whiskey. And today's nerd stuff is basically a brief discussion about an article I just read in The Economist. It's titled "The Country Needs More of You." Basically, it's talking about the draft, different options that different countries have, and what would play out and why some countries have an easier or harder time getting people in the military service. As I'm reading this, they do talk about other countries more than the U.S., but as I'm reading this, I'm wondering how hard would it be, to bring back the draft? What would happen in today's political climate if they wanted to do it? Would it depend on who was president, who was, what party was in control, and what was going on? But it's food for thought as I kind of highlight some of the parts in this article. Mandatory military service is under discussion once more in Europe, and then it goes into the various reasons, which you can go through here, and talks about that. Compulsory stints in the armed forces can take several forms, including the conscription of civilians of any age, call-ups using lotteries, and standard period of military service for young people after they leave school. So unlike in the U.S., there is a lot of countries that have people that have to serve, and then the public acceptance of various ways of doing that varies from country to country. They had a point out in here where it talked about Estonia and Finland. Public acceptance of conscription is high, and training prepares forces for porcupine defense against an invader. It talks about what they do in Israel, Taiwan, and South Korea, which I thought was interesting. And let's go ahead and flip the page. Let's take another sip real quick. It does also talk about before conscripting young people, obviously because you're conscripting young people infringes harshly on their liberty, the policy would need public support. Brings me back to the question of something were to happen in the United States. How easy or difficult would it be to reinstitute the draft in any number of levels? And then it kind of talks about what's going on in Ukraine and some of the difficulties they were having. But it also goes into that, but they can most likely resolve by means other than compulsion. So one of the things it talks about is, hey, pay soldiers more. First, consider raising soldiers' salaries. Then it also talks about there should also be more experimentation for instances with one-year trials of service that can be combined with university studies or other training. So, hey, pay your soldiers more. Give them more flexibility for people to join reserves or training. More civil society support is needed to attract those with specialist skills required in emergencies. So, doctors, first responders, you name it. And, those things that could be used where, hey, not only do you pay them more, give them the specialized training, pay for the schooling, and, beef up your reserve services. It also kind of talks about how in these tense times, countries should maintain plans for how, if the worst came to the worst, a much wider mobilization might occur. To deter the most dangerous enemies, you must be ready for war that you do not want to fight. Let me go ahead and take a drink again real quick. So as I'm thinking about this, I keep going back to what would it take or how bad things would get before in the U.S. they can reinstitute the draft, or what are ways that you can encourage more people in the military. And then for those that are not inside the United States, I would be curious what country you're from. Do you have a mandatory service in military service in your country? And if so, what is it? Is it 1, 2, 3 years? Is it like a reserve type thing? Is it a full time? Do they pay for your schooling? And how is the public support for that kind of thing in there? Again, I thought this was pretty curious in here. It was kind of making me thinking about a lot of different stuff. It was in the April edition of The Economist. There's some really cool articles in this one. Just something that I read, thought, hey, this would kind of make a cool video, and I've been talking to some friends about this as well. Really appreciate you taking the time to watch this particular video. Please like, subscribe, and all that fun stuff. And until next time, cheers.